Hello, welcome to This Side of the Ceiling. I'm Kelsey.
And I'm Jill, and we're two good friends trying to live this life on this side of the ceiling as abundantly as Christ has called us to.
We are by no means experts, but we love to study His Word and share everything that He has revealed and taught us.
So come along with us as we open up the scriptures and dive into His wonderful Word.
Welcome back to This Side of the Ceiling, and we are coming back to the story of David. We took a pause last time to talk about just the birth of Jesus at that time of year, and it seemed appropriate. But we're back to David, and we're in 1 Samuel chapter 26, where David is on the run from Saul. Saul is trying to take his life. He's with a group of men, I guess a ragtag bunch of men. Mm-hmm. And they are living in caves, they are living off the land, and they are everywhere trying to stay away from Saul.
Yeah, and we're actually in 1 Samuel 25, and we're about to meet a woman.
Yeah.
And this woman is a beautiful woman. Her name is Abigail. And probably this is the longest conversation of a woman that we have in the Bible. And we do have the Song of Deborah and a Song of Miriam, but that's more like a poem kind of thing.
And the book of Ruth and Esther.
Right, but listening to a story where Abigail said this, and then she said that, and then she did this, we're going to get to hear from Abigail's mouth.
Right.
And so I'm going to read from 1 Samuel 25, but I'm also going to just kind of paraphrase. So, David, as Kelsey said, was in the wilderness, and there was a man who's in Moan, whose business was in Carmel, and the man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, and it was shearing time, and he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. The man's name was Nabal, and the name of his wife was Abigail. The Bible tells us that Abigail was discerning and beautiful, but the man was harsh and badly behaved. And David hears that this rich man is shearing his sheep, so David sends some of his men and said, "Hey, we've been nice and we've been helping keep the thieves away from protecting the sheep. Why don't you go ask Nabal, greet him in my name, and tell him that we come in peace and that we've not any harm has come to his shepherds while they've been hanging out around us, and ask him if he'll give us something." So that was not unheard of, and David's men had been helping Nabal's men. So David sends his men, and they go to Nabal. And then I'm going to start reading. When Nabal hears the request of David's men, Nabal answers David's servants, "Who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants these days who are breaking away from their masters. Shall I take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed for my shearers and give it to men who came from I don't know where?" So David's men go back and they tell David everything that Nabal said. And these are the first words out of David's mouth. He says, "Every man strap on your sword." I mean, that's the kind of man David was.
Right.
He was a victorious fighter. And so he just says, "Everybody get your sword." Right. And he is mad. Yeah. So David says, and David also strapped on his sword, and about 400 men went up with David while 200 stayed with the baggage, and they are headed straight to Nabal. Now, Nabal was dumb and foolish, but his servants knew exactly what was happening. So they're smart, and they run home to Abigail. And they come to Abigail, and they tell her the whole story. They said, "David sent these messengers while we were out in the wilderness." And they tell Abigail, "The men were good to us. They helped us, and we didn't miss anything." I'm sure they said, "It was one of the best seasons we've had." And they said, "We're in trouble." And so they said, "Now therefore, know this and consider what you should do, Abigail, for harm is determined against our master and against all of his house. And he is such a worthless man that one cannot speak to him." So Abigail doesn't waste any time. Says she starts and she takes 200 loaves and 2 skins of wine and 5 sheep that was already prepared. And she gets a bunch of grain and 100 clusters of raisins and 200 fig cakes. And she puts them all on the donkeys. And then she has a plan. She says, you guys take all this food to David and I'm going to come behind you. And so David is coming with his swords, and it says, the Bible even tells us what David's thinking. It says, David had said, surely in vain I guarded all that this fellow had in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him, and he has returned me evil for good. God do so to the enemies of David and more, if by morning I leave so much as one male of all that belongs to him. So there's no doubt what David's plan is. He's going to take out every man. And then when Abigail sees David, she hurries and she jumps off of her donkey and she falls on the ground at David's feet. And listen to what Abigail says. She says, on me alone, my Lord, be the guilt. Please let your servant speak in your ears and hear the words of your servant. Let not my Lord regard this worthless fellow Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your servant, didn't see the young men of my Lord whom you sent. Now then, my Lord, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, because the Lord has restrained you from blood guilt and from saving with your own hand, now let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my Lord be as Nabal. And then she gives him the food and she says, let this present that your servant has brought to you be given to your young men. Please forgive the trespass of your servant, for the Lord will certainly make my Lord a sure house, because my Lord is fighting the battles of the Lord, and evil shall not be found in you as long as you live. If men rise up to pursue you and to seek your life, the life of my Lord will be bound in the bundle of the living in the care of the Lord your God, and the lives of your enemies he will sling out as the hollow of a sling. And when the Lord has done to my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you prince over Israel, my Lord will have no cause of grief or pangs of conscience for having shed blood without cause, or let my Lord take vengeance himself. When the Lord has dealt well with my Lord, then remember your servant. And David listens to Abigail. Yeah. And he said, blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you this day. Blessed be your discretion, and blessed be you. I mean, David just says, blessed be the Lord, blessed is your wisdom, and dadgummit, blessed are you. And he says, if you had not come, there would not have been a soul living.
Right.
And David listens to Abigail. And, I mean, there's a good part. The story ends even good, too. But right there, that's enough of the story for us to see some interesting characters at play here.
Yeah, there were 3 characters that I want to point out. The first one is Nabal. And, you know, in this story, he is at sheep shearing time, which is when a wealthy man starts counting his money and realizes how much more he's going to gain. And so normally this is a time where people ask the wealthy for something because they're more generous in this time of the year. And so it would be very, I can't think of the word, just very common for a wealthy man to say, sure, you know, it's...
Yeah, he was abundant wealth. He would have missed it.
Yeah, and they even explain how they had helped his men take care of these sheep. And so, but notice, Nabal's response in this situation is evil for good.
Right.
And that's, I don't think that's many people. I don't think they give evil when good is given to them. So that's kind of I guess we would call him a psycho or a maniac type of person that repays evil when good is given to him. And then there's David, who does really the predictable. He wants to give evil for evil.
Yeah, he's been mistreated, and he's going to sling it right back.
Right, and David knows how to do that. David knows how to get out his sword and fight. And so David does what most of us would do, I think, in that situation. He is going to repay evil for evil. But then Abigail, she's going to repay good for evil. And that response is difficult. She asked for an apology when it wasn't even her that had done
she
it.
takes credit. She takes the blame. Yeah,
she takes the blame. She talks into David's potential, and she praises the Lord that God has not allowed him to commit bloodshed yet, and so she actually gives good for evil. It reminds me of when my kids were little, and we would go to McDonald's play area, and there was an open area up high, where only the kids were, and it was like it looked like a wrestling arena, and that's a lot of times what would happen. And so my kids would come down talking about how these kids were not being nice, or they were doing this or that and the other. And so I really learned early as a mother that anytime I spoke God's word to them and not my own words, it really spoke louder. So, my tendency would be, well, you be nice. You don't do that. But then that verse would come to me because we had it in our car as a song. But I would look at them and go, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good.
Yeah, the Steve Green music's in the car that we all had in the time.
Yeah, so just the thought of overcoming evil with good.
And that's...
Go ahead.
Well, I think that you have an option. You don't want to have to throw back evil. Right. I can remember telling the kids, you have 3 options. You can... When someone hits you, you can hit them right back, which is your evil for evil. Or you can go get the teacher. Usually the thing you could go get the judge. Usually it was a scenario at school. Something happens on the playground. Someone is unkind to you, you can be unkind back. That's one choice, sometimes what our natural instinct is. Or you can go get a judge. You can go ask the teacher. And sometimes you need to do that. Sometimes it's a bully, and so you need to go get a judge, go get help. But there's also the third choice is that you can choose to forgive them. You can choose to not tell, just go on and, we used to say, get your reward in heaven someday. So we have choices.
Right. Yeah. And the choice of good for evil, I gave a challenge to my Bible class at Camp Dakota one time of, okay, let's try it. It was something with the boys their age were not being nice to the girls their age.
Yeah, typical.
So we're having this conversation. And it's like, okay, I know what we should try. And they all looked at me. I was like, we need to try giving good for evil. So write them nice notes. Like, be sincere and try it. And they looked at me like, that's crazy. That's not going to work. But it worked. They tried it. I said, just try it. Just try it. And it works. It's not your natural instinct. It's definitely not your natural instinct to repay evil with good. But it's what works. It does work. And you begin to forgive those people when you're trying to do good to them. And you start praying for those people and things like that. So anyway, Abigail's a great example.
Yeah,
of
she
that.
is. And I think if we zoom out a little bit of the story, we can see some other analogies too, because this can almost be a picture of how God feels toward men today. Has our world offended our King?
Yes.
Yeah, we have. We've offended our King. Well, has God treated the world as the world deserves right now? No. He's still offering grace. Why not? Well, because we've asked for mercy. You and I have appealed for mercy, and he has shown us grace. But is that going to last forever? Is God forgetful? No, he is coming back, and he will judge. And Nabal kind of represents the world. When we were reading in verse 11, I hope you notice how many times he's stressed about it was, why should he give my bread and my water and my meat? this stuff is mine. And, God has blessed us with Jesus, and to bow down so that instead of saying, I don't need him, this is all my stuff, we realize that none of this is ours, that we owe everything to Jesus. And so why hasn't he come back? Well, we haven't read the rest of the story, but what happens is Abigail she just goes and does that, and she doesn't tell Nabal. And because he's partying, so she waits until the next day when he's calm, and she tells him what she's done, and Bible says heart turns to stone, and he dies. And when David hears that, he sends messengers to come get Abigail and says, we've been sent to come take you to be David's wife. And Abigail doesn't think twice. Says she packs her bags and goes. And so, Jesus is delaying his bloodshed also because of a bride.
Right.
And that bride is the church and his people. And this woman, Abigail, is about to be transformed into being David's wife. And I think there's some lessons we can learn about David. Number one, she seeks the good of her husband and the servants of her household. And even though he didn't deserve it, he was not a good man. So I can't imagine that he was a good husband.
Right.
And if you're in a bad marriage and there is a man with 200 people with swords coming after your husband, hallelujah, you're out,
Right. Yeah.
And she doesn't do that because she still seeks him good. And that's what a wife is supposed to do, is to seek the good of her husband, even though he was not good to her. So we see Abigail doing that. And of course, she also is saving the servants. It's not their fault that their boss has made David mad. So we see Abigail. David is very specific in the Bible that he's going to kill the males.
Right.
So Abigail's safe, it looks like. But she goes to work diligently to seek the good of her evil husband and the household. And then also, you mentioned this, but she knew and believed God's destiny for David and speaks that to David. I mean, she doesn't ask David not to do it. She assumes he won't.
Right.
She basically tells David. It's like when you ask your husband, you are so strong. Can you carry this garbage out to the side? It's that you're speaking strength into them. And we see her do that when she says, as sure as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, the Lord has restrained you from blood guilt.
Right.
Well, he's got a sword right now, but
Right.
she's saying, thank goodness the Lord has restrained you from doing this.
Right.
And
David's story would have been so different. It would have been, I annihilated everyone and became king.
right.
And that's not what happened because of Abigail.
And somehow she knew his destiny. So I don't know if everybody knew that, but she speaks in, the Lord's going to get you in your kingdom and you don't want this on your conscience. And I don't know this. I haven't found this in any scholars, but I think it's interesting. The words that it's translated in English, it says, and the lives of your enemies he will sling out as in a sling. I would think that would be a pretty good picture to use with David.
Yeah.
This word picture of a slingshot.
Right.
Because she's reminding him, you were a little boy and you took down a giant.
Right.
You don't have to go after this guy. God's going to take care of you. So
Right.
Abigail believes and knows God's destiny for David and speaks it into him. I would hope that we could speak God's destiny for our family into them, that we can speak God's destiny for our friends and our children into them when they don't see it.
Right.
And then, David blesses her for that. David is so thankful for Abigail because he takes the rebuke. And I think that is something that we need to learn from. I mean, we could all go around and talk about regrets that we have. If I would only have not said that, or if I only would have gone to the person instead of to someone else and said, and David doesn't have this regret because he listens to Abigail.
Yeah.
There's
That's the man after God's own heart, I think, a picture of that.
absolutely, because his heart is soft and he stops himself. You know, sin is that way. There is a thought process. And there is time for us to change that action. There's a Psalm 32:6. I just want to read the first part of it, but it says, "Therefore let everyone who is godly offer prayer to you at a time when you may be found." And when you read that, it makes you think there's a time where you have a chance to not do something.
Right.
But then there's a point where you go past it and there's no turning back. And so, first of all, I love the story of Abigail as a strong woman who does what's right. Wise.
Discerning.
And then also, I love the fact that David listens to the rebuke. I don't know, we're talking about this now at this time, but in the news, in the Christian world right now, there is a prominent, popular Christian speaker who's written a lot of books and has a big mega church. And he has just very publicly stepped down for a little while. He's not gone anywhere. But he's telling his story, and the story is that he was DMing a friend on Instagram and not thinking anything about it, another woman friend that was not his wife. And one of her friends called him on it, like came and said, "Hey, I don't think this is right. That
Comfortable.
I think it's
frequent and comfortable."
And to his credit, he listened to her too. And it pricked his soft heart. And he immediately went to his wife, to the elders. Nothing had happened because he listened.
Right.
And there was that woman that came to him, and he listened and maybe saved his family. And so, that we would have soft hearts like David to listen, and that we would have Abigail who does what's right, and then in the end is rewarded and gets to ride off as the bride.
Thanks for listening and journeying with us on this side of the ceiling. See you next time.